Hello there everyone, my name is Nemanja from Next PC Optimization. Today I'll be talking to you about Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2 FPS, how you can improve it and if you can improve it. I'm a professional PC builder, PC optimizer and overclocker. I've been doing this specific work for well over 5 years and professionally did it for 2.5 years. I work with over 1,000 computers, most of them around 80% on Warzone, so I can, with safety, say that I can help you improve your FPS. I've prepared multiple points that we're going to talk about, everything that you should check on your computer, and if you see something that's not quite what I say how it should be like, then you can know for sure that you can get much better performance in Warzone. I've prepared 6 main points and 2 side points that we're going to be talking about one by one. First thing that we're going to do, if you're on Windows 10 or Windows 11, as you should be on either two of those, specifically Windows 10 does work a little bit better for Warzone, we're going to be opening up our Task Manager. That is done by right-clicking on your taskbar and then doing Task Manager. Next, we're going to go into Performance, and right here we can see the CPU I have, which is the Ryzen 7 5800X 8-core processor, memory, or in this case RAM, which is 32 gigabytes, 3800 megahertz, 2 out of 4 slots, which means I have 2 sticks installed in my PC. Next thing, we're gonna check the hard drive and the SSD. I have an SSD and a hard drive both. Make sure that your C drive is on an SSD. You can see right here it says SSD, disk 1, C. So my C partition, my C drive, which is the system drive, is on my SSD, which is much faster than my hard drive. Next thing, we have my graphics card, which is the AMD Radeon RX 6700 XT. You want to be sure that you have a decent GPU and a decent processor if you want to do this. If you have something much older, let's say 8th gen Intel or 2nd gen Ryzen, even 3rd gen Ryzen at this point, and probably like old RX 580 or GTX 1660 or a 1070, something in those lines, you want to be sure to first upgrade those, because all the work I'm about to show is not really going to benefit you much. One disclaimer before we do start is I do this professionally. I'm not going to show you everything. I will show you main things, like the way you can know for sure that you're missing out on performance. After that, you can either try to solve these issues yourself, or you can contact me and get it done professionally by me. I include support on all of my orders that I do with people, and those are lifetime warranties basically. Okay, so let's start. First thing that I've seen many times done on a computer, this especially happens if you upgrade your CPU. Many people try to tinker with the Windows settings and mess something up. You want to make sure that all of your cores are enabled, every single one of them. I have a Ryzen 7 5800X 8-core processor, and you can see it says 8 cores 8 right there. If you see, well, it really does depend on which CPU you have. I have an 8-core CPU, but let's say you have a 13900K, which is a 24-core CPU. It has 16 efficiency cores and 8 performance cores. You should be seeing cores 8, but there is a chance that you'll be seeing cores 12, cores 16, cores 8 even. If that happens, what you want to do is click on your search bar, type in msconfig, enter it, go into boot, advanced options, and make sure that here the number of processors is disabled. It's not checked. Do OK, apply, OK, and then restart your computer. It's basically 100% going to fix it. Another thing that can happen is that the processes or the cores are actually disabled in the BIOS. This is a little bit harder, and I advise that you contact me for this. It's nothing difficult, but it's not something that I can just tell you right away how to fix. Okay, so that's one very important thing. Make sure all of your cores are enabled. If you do not know how many cores you have, usually it does say it right here, like for me 8 core processor, but if it does not, go on your browser, whichever one you're using, type in the CPU that you use, let's say 10900K, sorry, 10900K. And right here we have the Intel website. Let's open it up. Intel Core 10900K. We can see total cores 10. So in Task Manager right here we should see cores 10. I don't have that CPU, so I do not, obviously. If you have an AMD CPU, let's say 7600X, which is a Ryzen 5 CPU. Right here, if we go to the AMD website, we can see number of cores 6. So in Task Manager, you should be seeing 6. This issue pops up mostly if you just upgrade your processor from like a Ryzen 5 to a Ryzen 9. And it's always because you played around with the settings every single time. It doesn't happen on its own, so if you didn't play around with anything, you should be good. But make sure to check it. Next, very, very important thing to check is your RAM configuration. Ideally, you want to have 32 gigabytes. 16 gigabytes is just cutting it. 64 is way too much. Please do not buy 64 gigabytes for gaming. Please do not. You're losing out on performance, and there is a chance your game crashes totally randomly. So 32 gigs is ideal for gaming. You have enough space and it's fast enough. Okay, so checked. We have 32 gigabytes of RAM. What do we check next? The speed. If you have DDR4 like I do, if you see that it's running 2133 megahertz right here, speed 3800 for me, but if it says 2133 megahertz, if it says 2400 megahertz, 2666 megahertz, there is a chance that your RAM is actually not running the speed it should. Now, how do we know which speed our RAM is supposed to run? Simple. There is this tools folder. I will link it in the description so you can download it. Open it up. Go into CPU-Z. Open that. And right here, if we go into SPD, select one of our slots. For me, it will be slot 2 or slot 4. You can see the profiles right here. I have XMP 3600 and XMP 3000. I'm using the profile that's 3600 MHz, and on top of that I overclocked my RAM to get as much performance as possible. So for you it may be 3200, maybe 4000, also maybe 3600, 3000 MHz, who knows. Point is, you just see which RAM you have, and then from there you're gonna know if something is not right. If it says XMP 3600 and you have it run 2133, you can definitely get more performance out of it. You can enable XMP in the BIOS, or you can contact me to do it for you and do like the entire optimization and overclocking. Okay, there is also a chance that your RAM is not read here. That's a bit harder then. You can download different programs. For example, I believe NZXT Cam actually has a little readout part where you can see the model number of your RAM. So find the model number. For me, it would be this, for example. Type into Google and see what your RAM is supposed to run at. Mine is 3600, I run 3800. Next, even more important thing is the RAM slots. How you install the RAM and how much RAM sticks you have. Please only have 2 or 4 sticks of RAM. If you have 1 or 3, that is really bad. You're losing out so much performance as it's not running dual channel memory, it's running single channel instead. So yes, ideally 2 or 4 RAM sticks in your computer. Now, right here you can see it runs 2 out of 4. Sometimes this misreads it and says like sometimes, let's say maybe you have a 2-slot motherboard with 2 slots for RAM, but it still says 2 out of 4. In that case, physically look at the computer, the RAM sticks. I'll put a picture of how it's supposed to look like, and make sure that the RAM sticks are 1 slot apart. If you have 4 sticks of RAM, or 4 slots, my apologies. You have 4 slots, make sure you have 2 sticks, they're 1 slot apart, ideally in slots 2 and 4, looking from the left side to the right side. 1 and 3 works the exact same, it is just practice to do 2 and 4 for airflow and similar purposes. If you have one stick or 3 sticks of RAM, it will say maybe right here, slot 1, it would have another 16 gig stick. Remove it. You're losing performance, you do not need it. If you have 32 gigs of RAM, you're absolutely fine. You do not need that stick. You're losing probably 20-ish% of performance just from that single thing. There's many things that can tinker your performance. So make sure you have two sticks of RAM or 4 sticks of RAM. Make sure they're mostly the same, ideally completely the same, just like mine are and many others. And if you have one stick of RAM, please just buy different RAM. I'll link a couple of good RAM options for both DDR4 and DDR5. Now let's talk about DDR5. If you have DDR5, it is the exact same rule for the slots, but it's different for the speeds. For the speeds, it's normal to see 4800 megahertz, 5200 megahertz. That's like the bottom. You do not want to be there. If it says 4800 megahertz and you're on DDR5, you definitely are not running correctly. You can check the possible RAM speed, the XMP profile, the exact same way that we check for DDR4, except here, ideally, you want to be at around, if it's Ryzen, you want to be at 6000 megahertz, and if it's Intel, 6400 megahertz or above. Another thing, please do not buy Corsair RAM. I know it looks good, but please do not buy it. It's generally performing pretty poorly. I work with so many Corsair kits, I can tell this from experience. They generally do not overclock at all, basically. I very rarely had a case where I could overclock them at all. They are very high latency usually. You know, some are exceptions, but generally they are very high latency. We're going to talk about latency later. And very often they don't even work at the rated speed. So please avoid getting Corsair RAM. I do suggest RAM like ideally G-Skill, T-Force works great. I have Kingston RAM. I've never had issues with their RAM. So those 3 brands are pretty good. You can go with them. I believe XPG is good. You can go with that as well. Okay. So also I did not say for DDR4, ideally for both AMD and Intel, 3600, the lowest possible latency. If you can do 3800, amazing, 4000, even better, but make sure the latencies are also low. We're gonna take a look at latencies right now. If you go into the tools folder, into hardware info, open up hardware info 64, it's gonna already check sensors only, so just do run. Okay, here's the window. Scroll down to memory timings. Right here, you can see the memory clock, which is your speed, 1900 megahertz times 2. It gives you your speed, which is 3800 megahertz. And next, the timings. This is just as important, if not more important than your RAM speed. Timings should be as low as possible. Ideally, they should be 14, 15, 15, and then as low as possible, like 35 or even less. This RAM is tuned, overclocked, and lower timings, so it runs really well. But this is not the best RAM still. I do not have the best computer out there. You can get much better performance than I do. I will later show you how my Warzone 2 runs. I do not really play Warzone, but I do mainly work on it, so I do test it quite a lot. Okay, so these should be as low as possible. Usually, especially if you bought a pre-built with like 3600 megahertz RAM, it's going to be 18, 22, 22, 42. That's usually what you're going to see. That's like almost bottom of the barrel RAM for 3600 megahertz. Again, I'm going to link some RAM in the description for you if you want to upgrade. RAM is extremely important for both FPS and FPS stability, as well as generally making the game feel smoother. Okay, now that we are done with the RAM, we can move on to the next part. Also something I see very often, PCI Express lanes and their bandwidth. Okay, let's open up the tools folder again, and you're gonna have GPU-Z. Open up GPU-Z. Okay, right here we can see a lot of information about our graphics card. I have a 6700 XT, as I said. It's not the best model of the GPU, but it does the job. Right here, bus interface, PCI Express X16 4.0. It's going to say how much your GPU can run ideally, and then add how much it actually runs right now. My GPU can run PCI Express 16 lanes at Gen 4 speeds, but it's running X16, 16 lanes at 3.0 speeds. That's not going to change anything in terms of FPS for me. But ideally, if you have let's say a 4090, you do want to have it running at 4.0 speeds. It's going to give you just a tiny bit more FPS. If you see it running, let's say, if your PCI Express 16X 4.0, it's running like X8, 3.0, 4.0, that is an issue. You can't be losing FPS. If you have like a 30 series GPU and you run X8 4.0, it's not a big deal. You're gonna run the exact same as if you had 16 lanes. But if you're running 3.0, you're definitely losing performance. What you can do in this case is make sure there is no other cards in your computer in the PCI Express lane. So basically, where your graphics card is, below there you may have some GPU, not GPU, sorry. Well, yeah, you may be have another GPU, but there may be a USB connector card, maybe a networking card, or a recording card. They can be causing issues. So make sure that your GPU is running the highest possible bandwidth. Some graphics cards do not have 16 lanes. Good example is the RX 6500 XT, which only has X4 4.0 lanes. If you have that GPU, please make sure to be on Gen 4. It's a big thing. And the next card is the RTX 3050, which only has 8 lanes, I believe. I may be wrong, but I believe it does have 8 lanes. And also make sure to be on Gen 4. How can you be on Gen 4 if it doesn't say that you're Gen 4, like I am not? Some CPUs or motherboards do not support Gen 4. I have a CPU that does support Gen 4, which is the Ryzen 7 5800X. However, my motherboard is older X470 chipset motherboard, and it does not support Gen 4, and thus I'm only running Gen 3, which is absolutely fine. I'm not losing any performance, which you will see later. Okay, that's another thing that we covered. Next thing is CPU clocks. Sometimes your CPU clocks can get throttled because of, for example, power plan, because maybe you have like Intel XTU or AMD Ryzen Master installed and you mess something up in those programs. Your CPU, depending on what it is, generally today runs at least around 4 GHz or more. If you have a 5800X, it should run about 4.5 to 4.7 GHz in games, similar to all other Ryzen 5000 CPUs, which should run between 4.2 and 4.8 GHz in games. Intel generally, let's say 10th gen, runs by default around 4.6 to 4.8 GHz in games. 11th gen runs about 200 MHz lower than that. 12th gen runs just about the same as 10th gen, but it does, let's say if you have a 12900K, it does boost up to around 5 GHz, and then the 13th gen, let's say 3900K, it boosts up to 5.5, maybe 5.6 GHz in games. So make sure that your CPU clocks are running as should. Next thing to check, very important, is your CPU thermals. How can you check this? You have two programs here, Hardware Info 64, I already showed it. Let's just see it again. So once it opens up, you can see your CPU core voltage here, you can see your current CPU clock, and you can see the temperature right here, which is 65 degrees right now because I am recording. You can run this IDA64 stress test. I'll show you how to run a stress test. Open it up, click on this little like graph icon, which is a system stability test, and then just click start. Give it 2 to 3 minutes and then look at the temperature that it gives up here. If it's way too hot and it's dropping down the clocks at the same time, it means you're overheating. Your CPU is overheating. It is not going to die, most likely, but try to solve that as soon as possible. If you don't know what to do, you can contact me on my Discord or email, and I can help you do that. Okay, next, there are two more things that are less important, however, definitely something that you should consider. Number of processes, right here in Task Manager, you can see it under the CPU tab. So I have 72 processes while recording, which is really, really good. When not recording and having like nothing open, it goes to like 55. That's really good. That's a very clean, well-optimized Windows. How can you reduce this? Remove anything that you can. All the programs, especially RGB programs. Things like Razor Synapse, Armory Crate, MSI, I don't know how exactly it's called, like Dragon Center or something like that, Mystic, like all that. Try to remove them. They have a lot of things running in the background, and then you're just losing on performance. It's not a good thing to happen. You're throwing away performance for nothing. If you have around 100 to 150 processes here, it's really not a big deal. If you have over 200, dropping it down to 60, 70, 80 like I have here, it's definitely going to help you get a bit more FPS. It's not the most major thing, but it's definitely something. And then I have very rare cases. I actually had a case yesterday with someone. He had 450 processes. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. Just by doing that, his FPS in Warzone 2, it was a 10700K, and the RDX 3080, by the way, went from 80 to 180 just by doing that, nothing else. And that's Warzone 2, not Modern Warfare 2. 180 from 80 that he was originally getting. So he had so much stuff running that it completely crippled his computer. And the last thing we're going to talk about is your graphic settings. They are not too important. Of course, if you run low settings, you're going to get a bit better FPS. But there are many factors with your FPS and graphic settings. We're going to launch Warzone now. Let's do that. I'm not going to record the actual match, as OBS will completely destroy my FPS. Also, just because this popped up. If this pops up to you, just always say no. Always. I'm not going to be recording. Also here, no. I'm not going to be recording in the actual match with OBS because it will completely destroy my FPS. Usually I get 170 to 190 FPS average. At some places on the map it goes to 200 plus, which is really, really good for this setup. So this is around the 10700K and the 3070 RTX 3070 PC. For those who do not know how this AMD system performs compared to Intel and Nvidia. Okay, so here we are in Warzone. We're gonna go into settings, we're gonna go into graphics. I run everything lowest, and I also have AMD FSR 1.0 enabled, except this. I just have to put that. There we go. Everything else I basically run lowest possible settings, and this for some reason is not, as well as this. I guess it got reset or something. That's okay. Everything I'll run lowest because I don't really have an amazing GPU, especially considering I'm actually running 1440p and not 1080p. I'm not going to record in the actual match, like right here, like you can see it. I'm going to record with my phone so I don't lose any performance. We're now going to drop into a match and you're going to see how it performs. I'll talk to you in a minute. Alright friends, we're now in the plane. You can see how my FPS is. So 200, 240, sometimes even that is in the plane. We're gonna drop now anywhere and we're gonna see how it runs. Okay, so I dropped at Hydroelectric and I'm currently looking at the town. I'm not on the edge of the map, as you can see. And right here, which is one of the weaker spots for my computer, I get around 160 to 170 FPS sometimes. You can see one very important thing that I want to explain is GPU time and CPU time. You can see that my CPU time is not much higher, it's just a bit higher than the GPU time, which means I'm actually limited by my CPU. It means that if I had a better CPU, I could be getting 200 right here right now. Okay, now let's go to a to a different spot so you can see how it runs there. We are now at the airport where I range between 170 and 200 FPS. As you can see, I'm going to run just a little bit, and I hope you can clearly see my FPS. It does drop sometimes, but it's pretty good. Opa, there we go. You can see that kind of the range between worst case 150, usually around 170, 180, and it does go to 200, sometimes over. Now let's go to the airstrip. We are right now at the airstrip, looking towards the actual map, not towards the sea. And just so I can show you, I am in a normal match. It's been like, I don't know how long. And you can clearly see I am bottlenecked by my CPU still, which means if I had a better CPU, I could be getting like 240 here or something like that. Let's just run forward now. Well, now you have a good idea how this PC should be working, and as well you can compare your PC to my PC. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like to show your support. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I will respond to every single question that I see. Also, if you are interested in inquiring my services, please contact me in the contacts I left below, which is either through WhatsApp, email, or Discord. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.